also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation. And when we're talking about homelessness, it's always very important to remember the original dispossession in 1788. So the question is, who is homeless out there? And that's what I'm going to start to talk about, and why we actually need to have the point about homelessness in the 5-point plan. What we do know, and we have some very poor data on homelessness, as I only half-jokingly put about to people, I can look on my iPhone now and find the current trade deficit of our country from May this year. We're only halfway, we're at the end of June, but I can find current trade deficits from May because we as a nation think that collecting data about trade deficits is important. We as a nation do not think that collecting data about homelessness is important. Otherwise we'd have better data on homelessness. What we do know is that in the census of 2011, so 5 years ago, in a couple of months' time, we had about 28,000 people in New South Wales who are homeless. And that is 28,000 too many. But they consisted of different groups. We had rough sleepers out there, and they're a very small but a very visual group, and they're the people you actually see sleeping rough. But the far larger number of people who are homeless are in other population groups. We have people who are in boarding houses. And again, we have a lot of boarding houses in this area. Newtown, inner Sydney, out towards Ashfield has a lot of boarding houses. Unfortunately, they're becoming more and more unaffordable as we speak. People are now spending up to $200 and more for a room in a boarding house. We have cases where proprietors are still out there doing over the residents severely. We have one boarding house in Newtown where the residents do not have a proper kitchen. They have to cook in the backyard with extension leads. The council has taken the proprietor owner to court. He has been ordered by the courts to put a kitchen in, makes sense to everybody else except for him, and he has said he will do that when there's an order for him to do it. So he's not even bothered to lodge a DA. So he is going to be dragged through the courts kicking and screaming. People still paying about $200+ a week to live in that premises. We have a major problem with couch surfing. A lot of young people couch surf. We do know that as a very hard figure to count. The census is actually called a census on population and housing. To actually know the person who is staying at your house, whether they're a young person, if they're couch surfing or just staying with you as a friend of your child for a few days or a week, is a very difficult thing to know. So we know there's a major undercount there. Another area is severe overcrowding, and in New South Wales that is the fastest growing group of homelessness. That is where people have 4 or more bedrooms short of what the national standard decrees. The national standard says that there should be adults, a couple can share a room, but children up to the age of 6 or so can share a room. If they're of a different gender, beyond 8 they should have separate bedrooms. These people are 4 or more bedrooms short, and we know that means you're looking at people of 14 and 15 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. And that is growing rapidly in New South Wales. In Sydney it grows largely out in Western Sydney around Blacktown, Mount Druitt, and we do know that's an Indigenous issue out there, and in southwest Sydney through a crescent shaped between Bankstown, Liverpool and out to Campbelltown, and that is first generation people from overseas, so a non-English speaking background. We believe that one of the major drivers of that group of homelessness is the lack of affordable housing. Why would I want to share a house with 15 people in my 2-bedroom apartment? It's because I can't afford anything else. Why do I spend $220 a week in a boarding house with inadequate resources and services? Because I can't afford anything else. Why do I couch surf? Because I can't afford anything else. So there's some of the people who are out there who are homeless. The rough sleepers are a very pointy part of it. Homelessness New South Wales has been driving a discussion and an understanding of the government over the last few years about different groups of homelessness as well. and we do have some faster growing groups of homelessness. One of those is older single women, and these are women who are 60 years or more, and they are homeless for the first time. They have never been homeless till they hit that problem in their life. They've been in and out of the workforce, casual employment, no superannuation, and the killer is they're in private rental when they retire. If you're in home ownership, the age pension is actually designed for people who own their own home. It is not designed, our age pension system is not designed for people in private ownership. There's not enough money to pay the rent and to live. So these people run out of a nest egg and then they end up on the streets. We've been talking to the government about that since 2007, 2008. Finally the government understands it's an issue. Finally we're starting to get some understanding. Not movement, but at least understanding. Another group of people out there, fast growing, are homeless veterans. And we're not talking about Vietnam veterans, we are talking about Afghanistan and Iran. We're talking about veterans from the current conflicts. And we actually have more people serving, or we had more people serve in Afghanistan and Iran than we had at Vietnam. And we know the problems that came out of Vietnam when people came back. There was massive homelessness, PTSD, suicide. Department of Defence and DVA should be condemned for their lack of action to actually ensure that we have these people who have served our country. They should be housed adequately when they come back. We have the ridiculous situation where men are sleeping in their cars. Some men actually know that living in their home with their wife and children, they are unable to function. So they sleep in their car. DVA, the system does not recognise them as homeless because they actually still have a home, even though they are not accessing it. So we have a problem there in the system, which we keep talking to government about, and one day it might get some action. Family and domestic violence, again, is just a huge blight on our society and a major driver of women's and children's homelessness. We get occasional outbursts of goodwill from government, occasional bits of money, but we have a core problem out there we just don't do anything about. And we do know there's major problems. We know that homelessness is increasing. I talked about the 28,000 people in the census. This year the census is in a couple of months' time, in August, and we won't get the figures till next year. But we know, by talking to our members across the state, we have about 120 around the state, that the numbers of homeless people are increasing tremendously. The only evidence we have for that, real evidence, is the City of Sydney that does a street count twice a year. And they've been doing this for about 8 or 9 years now. And when they started doing it, we had a very high count in Sydney, and then the count went down. In the last couple of years, the count's been going up, and in February this year, the count was at the highest level it has ever been since they started doing the counts. And the other problem is that we know that the services were full. So all the crisis services were full, and you've got all the rough sleepers out on the street. So we just can't keep building more crisis services. We actually have to have a level of affordable housing so that people can get off the street, out of the crisis services, and into a proper place to live. It is shameful. 1 in 2 people who turn up at a crisis service in New South Wales are turned away. There's no room for them to get in. And that doesn't matter if it's a DV service, youth, adult, across the board, 1 in 2 people are turned away. I was going to talk briefly, but I won't. I'll try and ignore the state government's reform of homeless services, going home, staying home. I think that was talked about before here. But one of the problems with that, when the government reformed homeless services, they actually dropped the ball. The New South Wales government dropped the ball on the other issues that actually drive homelessness. And there are major drivers out there of homelessness. Our out-of-home care system, our foster care system, is a major driver of homelessness. We know that children who go into out-of-home care are far more likely to end up as homeless youth and homeless adults. We know that our jails are a major driver of homelessness. We still have a ticker box system. As people leave jails, they're actually asked, so where are you staying tonight? I'm going to stay with my mum. Okay, they tick the box, good, you've got a place to stay. So he goes and stays with his mum for 2 nights, and then he's kicked out of his mum's because there's a problem there, and that's why he's in jail in the first place, and he's back at the homeless service. Or even worse, the homeless services rang up on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock and said, oh, there's a guy coming out of jail in 2 hours, can you take him in? And the service says, well, we don't have room, number one, and we don't know anything about him, and to actually look after this guy properly, you should have told us about him, we could have been working with him for months. And they say, oh, sorry, that didn't happen. But bottom line is we've got no room. And they say, no, that's no problem. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a knock at the front door of this homeless service. It's the guy who's just been kicked out of jail. The taxi's going down the road. He's just been put in a cab and sent down to the homeless service. That still occurs today on a weekly basis in New South Wales. The health system. Alison told me an appalling story on the way over here in the cab. We know that every day the health system discharges people into homelessness. There is a protocol that says we will not discharge into homelessness. Every day they do it. Our education system is improving to actually enable and give the support to teachers to recognise young people who are having trouble, so they can recognise the young people and say, okay, they might be having some trouble at home, and get the support for them so they don't end up as homeless. We'd have liked to have thought this week in the budget, New South Wales had their budget, and we know there's swimming in cash in New South Wales now. We flog off everything that's not nailed down, so we've got lots of money. Poles and wires, schools, we can sell anything. So we've got a lot of money. No money for affordable housing, no real money, but $3.8 billion for additional jails. $2.2 billion of that going to building new structures. I mean, as we keep saying, an early intervention program, we wouldn't be having to spend money on jails. The jails are the result of a failing society. They're not the result of a good society. Last year, we, along with a number of other organisations, did what was called a registry week. So we went and actually interviewed 500 plus people in Sydney who are homeless. And it was probably some of the most enriched data we've ever had about people who are actually on the street or in boarding houses or in the crisis service system. And I'll just read some of the data off there. Because we often get told by certain people who might have been Prime Minister before and might want to be Prime Minister again after the election, that some people on the street choose to be homeless. It was really interesting. Of the 516 people we interviewed, not one of them has an income over $400 per week. Not one. So if homelessness and living on the street is a choice, it's obviously strangely a choice only that poor people make. We didn't find any millionaires. I didn't find Gina Reinhardt out there on the street. She wasn't sleeping rough. No, don't think so. No, only poor people. So maybe, is it a choice? It's only a poor person's choice. 53% of the group we interviewed had been in jail. 65% had been arrested. 44% reported being a victim of violence. 13% had no income. 29% have an acquired brain injury. So when we're talking about people on the street, there's a reason people are on the street, and it's largely because of trauma, PTSD, and acquired brain injury, mental health and disability. That's why people are on the street. Comparison in the general population is about 2 to 3% of the general population are acquired brain injury. So 29% to 2 to 3%. One of the things we also discovered through this process, and it was a health survey largely, and it had some failings, but one of the really good things we found out there was that around 14% of the people that we surveyed, their only need is an affordable place to stay. They have no support needs at all, not one. They just need an affordable place to live. 51% need an affordable place to live, plus some short to medium term support, but support that will be able to be, withdrawn over time, so they'll be able to function properly without any support at all eventually. 35%, so just over a third, will require support forever. So that's the people with the 29% with acquired brain injury and some other people out there that will require support forever. So that's why homelessness in New South Wales, we look at that data and we say, wow, we've got a huge problem out there. So that's why we signed up very willingly with Shelter, the National Shelter, Homelessness Australia, which is interesting. National shelter's been defunded. National Homelessness Australia's been defunded under the current government. To actually say we need to have these 5 reforms, and the one on homelessness is very specific, that we wanted all parties to actually commit to a renewed plan to halve homelessness by 2025. We had these plans before under New South Wales and federally. I remember going around the state talking to people. They were the halcyon days of our lives, and we thought we were going to actually do something. But so to actually cut the number of people by half by 2025 and address the drivers of homelessness, because there's no point. Services don't want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff any longer. They actually want to stop people being homeless. An early intervention strategy is better for us as society, for the individuals. And if I were to actually take the economic rationalist point of view, I'd argue that's the best thing to do. That's a better way to spend our money. Rather than spending $3.8 billion this year on jails, wouldn't we be better spending $3.5 billion on early intervention programs to stop people going into jail? Well, we could save $300,000. Multiply that over every year, we could actually make savings. It's actually cheaper to stop people being homeless. Those that do become homeless will require adequate and flexible support, and the services are generally very good at doing that. They're very good at doing the support, but they can't get people out. So people get into the service and they can't move on. They're stuck there because there's nowhere to move on. There's nothing affordable. We need a recommitment to this target for reducing homelessness. It should be integrated with a wide range of strategies which provide housing and address known risk factors leading to homelessness. As I said, I'll wrap up now just talking about again out-of-home care. One of the issues I said, we know that children who go into out-of-home care end up as adults. And one of the reasons for this is that when you're in out-of-home care at 18, generally you're then moved out and you're deemed an independent adult. But we know that these days, children in what pass for functioning households are in and out of the house 20, 25, up to 30 years old. But the children that are most vulnerable, the youth that are most vulnerable, we say to them 18 or 21, sorry, you're on your own with very little support. And you wonder why the system's broken. So that's why we're committed to this. Happy to have some questions after this, but thank you very much.